All right, so let's talk about apply to similar. And just like some of the other features in ZBrush 2024, I'm certain there's cooler things I could be doing with this that I'm just not thinking of. So drop them in the comments. I want to steal all your ideas and maybe do videos about them later. But apply to similar, I'm going to do the base functionality up front, and then, stick around if you want to dive deeper with me. Although this one should be pretty interesting all the way through. We've talked a little bit about, again, the IMM stroke functionality in ZBrush 2024, so I can literally go in here and drag out copies of an object, for example. So this polysphere with a dot stroke, I can drag out some of these. I can go through here, I can make my draw size bigger and drag out bigger versions and make my draw size smaller and drag out smaller versions. I'm going to go through here, I'm going to hold down Control Shift and tap the plane, and then under subtool do a split hidden. And now I've got a bunch of different sized polyspheres that I can play with. Let's go ahead and hide our plane here. And again, we have small, medium, and large, but they're all the same topology. So here's a really cool thing. If I go into the geometry menu, underneath the tool menu, geometry, there's a repeat to similar parts button, and you're going to see right away there's apply to similar. It's a big old button, and over here there's options that we can apply to similar. So one really important thing is hold down Control and tap this point in history. Now, on my YouTube channel, if you go in here and type in history, you're going to see a lot of really cool things you can do with history. Morph history is a new one, project history brush. There's a lot of things you can do with ZBrush history. One of those things is to store the state of these objects so we can get ZBrush set up for success and use this apply to similar button correctly. So before I do anything to these objects, make sure you get them all laid out and then hold down Control and tap their current state in history. So before I hit this apply button, I'm going to go through and I'm going to make a change to one of these objects. Doesn't matter which one, they're all the same topology. And if I go through here and I move some of these points out and then I say apply to similar, it's going to update all of those objects to match that current one. Now, again, as you can see here, it works with different scale, it works with different position, and it works with different orientation. So if I hold down Control Alt and then unmask this one, we'll hit W. I'm going to hit this little teardrop icon to go to Unmask Mesh Center. I'm going to rotate this one so it's looking up this way, and I'm going to do the same thing for this one. Just hold down Control Alt and drag over this, and then go to Unmask Mesh Center, and I'm going to make it so that it's looking down and to the left. So I've changed the orientation on these. I'm going to Control tap that point in history to store that state. And then again, if I hit go into my move brush, here's something you can do with your move brush. If you use your move brush to just drag, it'll kind of drag based on screen space. If you hold down Alt while using the move brush, it'll drag along the surface normal. So if I go through here and I hold down Alt and I drag these points up and I say apply to similar, you're going to see all the ones with the same orientation will be updated, and all the ones with the different orientation will be updated based on their surface normal. So if you rotate an object, any change will also inherit the rotation of that object. So let's go ahead and undo that. I'm going to hit Control D a couple times to get more resolution on these. And again, we have polyframe turned on, so we can see the different polygroups here. And you can see over here in our options, we have groups as one of those options. So if I was to, again, hold down Control and tap this point in history because we did do a subdivision, I'm going to hold down Control and mask this out and hit Control W and then say apply to similar with groups turned on. If you hit that, it will go through, and any polygroup changes you've made to that object, it'll propagate it out to the other objects. Remember, also keeping the orientation of those two that we changed. If we undo that, Control drag to unmask, you'll see we have masking as one of those. So if we mask this object and then apply to similar, it'll go ahead and mask the other objects. Pretty self-explanatory. And if we turn off polyframe here and we go back up to our subtool menu, we turn on that colorize icon, that little paintbrush icon. We'll come back down here. We're going to choose a red color. We're going to paint, let's go to our standard brush, turn on RGB, turn off Z-add, and then with red selected, we can paint on this object, and then again with colors turned on, we can apply to similar. So obviously pretty cool, right? Before we get into topology and precision, I'm going to talk about some other options here. So let's go ahead and we'll just undo back to where we just have our spheres sitting here in space. I'm going to go to BI, which is B to bring up the brush menu, I to narrow it down to brushes to start with I, and we're going to choose IMM zipper. So if I drag this out, number one, it's going to yell at me because I have subdivision levels on this. Let's undo that, and let's say delete lower. And then now when I drag this out, We have a zipper object with a curve attached. If we want to get rid of that curve, just tap away from that curve onto another object. I want to put this into its own object or its own subtool. So I'm going to go down here to split mask points, and that'll split the zipper out to its own subtool here. If I turn on polyframe and turn on line, you can see the geometry a little bit better. And if you know anything about IMM brushes being repeated along a curve, you'll know that these are the same repeating objects. And in fact, even up here in this original, in the start object here for our IMM curve brush, these objects in here are also the same topology, and ZBrush knows that, and we can use that to our advantage. So with this object selected, or the subtool selected, we're going to go back down here to geometry. Here's our apply to similar. Again, control tap this point in history to store these shapes. And then I'm going to go through here with my move brush. And if I move this shape out and I say apply to similar, it will go through and update all of those different shapes that are the same object, basically. And it's even cooler than that. So if we go through here, we'll undo that. I'm going to go to our Z modeler brush, BZM. I'm going to hold down Alt, and you can go through here and you can kind of like, you know, paint these faces. And if you're new to ZBrush, go to hit that, smash that like and subscribe button, blah, blah, blah. Go to my Intro to ZBrush playlist, and this will get you caught up in Z modeler functionality. But basically, you can hover over a face, hold down spacebar, inset, polygroup all, legacy. And if I pull this in, we can start modeling this, and we can go switch this to our Q mesh brush, Q mesh this out. And now I've made changes to this. I'm going to say apply to similar, and it's going to change all of those objects. Now, remember, if I undo that, if for some reason I don't want the other ones to get polygroups updated, you can just turn off groups and apply to similar. It will give the geometry changes. It will update the other objects, but it just won't update the polygroups. In my case, I usually like having polygroups there, so I'll turn groups on and just say apply to similar. So, and again, this isn't using nano mesh, this isn't using array mesh, this is literally ZBrush just looking at these other objects that we just dragged out and being able to update and propagate out changes of that object to other objects. That's pretty cool. Again, if you think of other cool ways to use this, please drop them in the comments, because I want to know cool stuff too. And you know, we'll stick with this now because there's so many cool things you can do with this. So here's some new functionality in ZBrush 2024. If we go down here to masking, you're going to see there's a new grow all. So if I mask a little piece of this object and then say grow all, it'll mask just this object. Then I can control tap to invert that mask. So I have just this object unmasked, basically. I'm going to control tap that point in history to store these objects in history. I'm going to hit W on my keyboard, and by default, the gizmo is just out here at the end. I'm going to hit this little teardrop icon, which is go to Unmask Mesh Center, and I'm going to hold down Alt. Well, hold down Alt and hit the teardrop icon to go to Unmask Mesh Center, and I'm just going to kind of position this in here. Now, I'm going to go to B to bring up my brush menu, I to bring up my insert brush menu. We'll grab industrial parts in here. And one of the functions of IMM brushes is I can swap out an object with an IMM brush. All I have to do is just be in gizmo mode, hit W on your keyboard, and I can swap this object out for, I don't know, a piston. This piston came in pretty big, but that's okay. We can just scale it down, and we can orient it if we want to. We can make changes. If we want to taper this, we can go in here, and we can say, you know, run a taper on it, and we'll just taper this out if we want to. Whatever changes we want to make to this object. Now, I can't just hit apply to similar because everything's masked. It doesn't know what to apply similar to because it can't apply to anything because everything's masked. If I control drag to unmask and say apply to similar, it will replace all of those objects, those similar objects, with this new updated object. Now, the reason why I say it's important that you have to unmask everything is, again, if we have this state and we have, again, we'll control drag over these and we'll say grow all, we can apply to similar. It will just ignore anything that's masked. So obviously, if you're going through and swapping out an object and everything's masked and you say apply to similar, it's going to error out on you. You have to unmask or have something unmasked that you can apply similar to. So that's the basics of apply to similar. Stick around if you want to go through some other examples and then dive into, you know, what topology only and precision means. But again, I think this is super exciting. Drop some comments that tells me other cool ways you can use this thing that I'm not thinking of. So let's talk about precision. Let's go ahead and we don't need the zipper anymore. We'll just delete this out of our scene. And in fact, we don't even need this plane anymore. So we've got our spheres. Now, these are all spheres. They're the same topology. They did have subdivision history. We deleted it. That's totally fine. In fact, let's get a little more resolution on these. Let's hit Control D once. And then again, we'll switch our material out so we can see a little bit better. We'll do matte cap gray. And again, let's talk about topology and precision. In fact, we'll go ahead and just turn these other ones off. With everything turned off, it will just do topology changes, basically. So, precision. Let's make a minor change to this. So if I go into my move brush, again, if you hold down Alt, it'll pull along the surface normal of an object as opposed to just kind of, moving based on screen space. So if I make a minor change to one of these, again, I'm going to hold down Alt. I'm just going to make a little bump on this object here. I'm going to Control Tap to store these objects in history. So they're the same topology. This one just has a minor change to it. Store that, Control Tap. If I make a major change to this one, and then I go over here and say apply to similar with precision set to 0.1, it's going to apply to similar all the objects that were pretty much the exact same as this one, but ZBrush noticed that there's a slight change to this object here. So if you undo that, well, let's go ahead and make our large change here. If you start nudging this up to say like 0.25 or 0.2, it still ignores it. If you change it to like maybe 0.5, apply. Okay, now this one updated. And remember, we changed the rotation on this one, so it kept the orientation of the new object orientation that we put in there. But it did update it. So when we set precision to 0.5, it went ahead and updated everything. If you don't want to deal with precision or deal with like cranking this value up so that it propagates to all possible objects, you can go over here and hit this topology only button. And if you hover over this, it'll tell you it's going to apply this to all parts that have the same topology, even if they have different shapes. So where that comes into play is, let's go a little bit crazy. Let's go through here with our move brush, and I'm going to move this one in and out, and then this one will have 2 out, and then this one will have 3 out, 2 out, 1 in. We'll do 3 out on this one. So again, I'm just making a bunch of arbitrary changes to these objects here. So they're all the same topology. They're all similar. So I'm going to Control Tap to store these in history. However, ZBrush is looking at these changes and determining if I go through here and I say, with topology only turned on, no matter what I do to one of these objects. So again, I'll just move this out. So this is the object I've updated since I stored history. Apply to similar. Regardless of any changes I've made, if it's the same topology, it will get this object propagated to the other ones. However, if I have topology off and precision on, if I change this down back down to like 0.1 and say, okay, Control Tap these points in history. I'm going to make a change to this one. I want to propagate this object to the other ones. I'm going to hit apply to similar. It's going to give you this. It's kind of a vague error message. They do have identical topology. However, this precision slider is keeping me from propagating these changes out because these other objects are too dissimilar. Same topology, but too dissimilar in the sculpt, basically. So if I undo that, and then I change this precision up to, say, 0.5, let's just try this, and then we'll do another big change, apply to similar, not high enough, we'll undo that, we'll hit 1, make a change, 2, there we go. So with 2 selected, if I undo that so we can see, 2 is the precision. I'm going to hold down Alt, and I want to say, okay, this object here, I want to propagate changes out to everything. Well, ZBrush is going to look at your objects and go, basically, these ones are close enough to this object to where I feel comfortable propagating these changes out, but with a precision of 2, these objects are too dissimilar. I'm not going to propagate your changes. Again, if you want to force it, you can say, we'll undo that, we'll say topology only, and apply to similar, and or crank that precision up, apply to similar, probably get the same result between those 2 options there. But that's essentially what topology only and precision means. So now let's do a kind of a fun thing. Let's go in here. We'll grab a cube primitive out of our tool palette here. I'm going to turn on polyframe. You can see we'll say make polymesh 3D. We're going to make a brick. So I'm going to hit W on my keyboard, and we'll scale this down so that we basically have a nice brick shape here. There we go. And I want nice even topology on here. So geometry, ZBrush will say, and in fact, let's switch our material out so we can see a little bit better. ZBrush half, detect edges, hit zero mesh, nice even quads. In fact, we can do adapt the size down to 0. Nice even quads and even simpler. So we have a cube basically that has nice even topology. I'm gonna hit W on my keyboard. I'm gonna hold down Control and drag out a copy of this. And before I let go of Control, I'm gonna kind of get my spacing correct. And then I'm gonna let go of Control and continue dragging, and it'll just drag out copies of this. So I'm gonna Control drag to unmask, hit W, go to unmask mesh center, again Alt and teardrop icon. I'm going to go to the top here. In fact, let's turn on our floor so I know what direction I'm in. Okay. You know, and we can even put this in the middle of our world if we hit that house icon. So we're going to go into the gear here, and we're going to choose bend arc. We're going to bend this backwards so that they almost touch. And then I'm going to go in here to the radius, and we'll crank that radius down just a little bit, and we'll start making a well. I'm stealing this from Paul Gabry, by the way, when I was watching his demo and doing the column. I'm not sure if this is how he made it, but that's how I'm going to make it. So I'm going to hit W, and I'm going to hold down Control and drag up a copy of this. We're going to go, and we're going to hold down Shift. Oops, let's hit the go to unmask mesh center icon, Alt and teardrop. And then we'll hold down Shift, and we'll kind of scooch this over. And then, so now we've got alternating bricks here. And then again, one more time, we'll hit, hold down Control, drag this up, and then we'll just continue, let go of Control and just continue dragging. So now, just like that zipper example we used where we use an IMM brush, we basically modeled one object and repeated it a whole bunch of times. In fact, if you want to kind of move this in your world, you can just kind of scoot this over to the middle. So now I'm going to Control tap these points in history. We're going to go over here to apply to similar. I'm going to use my move brush, and I'm going to move this out, say apply to similar, and obviously all the bricks have been updated. If I want to go through here with my ZModeler brush, BZM, hover over an edge, say, you know, bevel, edge loop complete. I can go over here and say apply to similar. And because we didn't have groups turned on, it beveled them. It just didn't apply the polygroup. Let's undo that. Let's turn groups on and say apply to similar. Now all of my bricks have bevels. And just like we did before, I'm going to hold down Control. I'm going to drag over a little piece of this. We'll do masking, grow all, Control tap to invert that mask, W to go into gizmo mode. I'm going to go to unmask mesh center, the teardrop icon with Alt held down. We'll orient this. Let's go to BI brush insert. Well, first, let's Control tap this point in history. We'll go to BI brush insert model toolkit. Your icon's probably going to look different than mine. I'm going to go through here. Again, it gave us a mess. It's giving us a very large object, but we can scale it down. I'm going to grab one of these kind of brick-shaped panels. We'll do panel 8 in here. And let's go ahead and make this fit our object. So I'm going to hold down Shift, and we're going to rotate this 90 degrees, and then hold down Shift and rotate it 90 degrees, and we'll scale this down. And we'll position this in here. And again, if I want to bend this, I can go in here to bend arc, and we can say, hey, let's bend this to kind of match the overall shape of this brick, and we'll position it. And if we're happy with this, we can control, let's go ahead and scale it down just a little bit. There we go. So we're going to swap all of these bricks out with this piece, this little sci-fi brick right here. So we'll Control drag, apply to similar, and every object has been updated to be that new sci-fi brick. And again, if you don't want this to propagate out to every one of them, and in fact, we'll fix that orientation a little bit here. So there we go. We can mask over these here. We can do our mask grow all. We can go back in here and say apply to similar, and it will just update the bricks that are unmasked. So again, easy way to go through here. It's kind of magic to go through here, and we're not using nanomesh, like I said, we're not using array mesh. We're just using the existing geometry and doing all sorts of cool stuff with it. Let's go ahead. Let's talk about one troubleshooting thing, though. If you're going through, let's go back to where we just had our bricks. Here's our history. Let's go back to that stored history point. If like we said, you can go through here and you can use move, and then you can say apply to similar. However, if you use move with a big old brush radius and you move more than one object and hit apply to similar, it's going to error out on you. You want to make sure you're just moving or sculpting on one object. Of course, in the case of move, we can go down here to brush auto masking, turn on topological, And then if we go through here and move, it will only move one object, the first one you touch. So that's one way to ensure that if you're using move, it's just going to move one object. And then you can, again, apply to similar. So again, in the comments, drop me all the cool things you think you can do with this. If you want to know stuff similar to this, you know, how do I say this? You can go to my YouTube channel. There is a thing called nano mesh. So if you go through here and you do a search for nano mesh and even micro poly and even array mesh, all of those can do kind of similar functionality. So go check out those videos. There might be instances where you may want to use those options instead, but this is pretty cool. So I'll leave this video here and we'll move on to the next one.